Lindsay, how's it going?
Good, thanks. You?
Yeah, good, thank you. So today we're talking about psychosis, a very misunderstood kind of phenomena or diagnosis. I mean, if I think of psychosis, I kind of imagine what I thought when I was a kid, like you're psycho, you're crazy, is something really wrong with you? And often thinking psychosis is schizophrenia and sort of mixing everything up all together. Specifically, what is psychosis?
I guess we can think about rather than maybe a psychotic disorder, thinking about psychosis as a continuum, almost as a symptom where someone can have a range of different experiences that would then have it fall under this umbrella. But it's often about having a different sense of reality than people around you. So you might be seeing things other people can't see, hearing things other people can't hear, thinking things that people around you be like, no, that's not right, or that's not reality, or having ideas that perhaps would be disconnected from what might be considered a more reality-based understanding of a situation, often very scary for the person,
Very
but in
scary.
those moments, feeling very real.
Yeah, very, very scary. And I think some of the kind of hallmark sort of categories under psychosis, like derealization,
Mhm.
which is this kind of sense of the world not really feeling real. You know, the
Mhm.
environment feels dreamlike, foggy, distant, colors seem a bit duller, objects appear more flat. This kind of it just familiar places feel like they're unfamiliar. So it's like I'm living in a dream or like in a fog.
Mhm.
That's what I've heard people that I've worked with say. And then depersonalization, which is like I don't feel real. You know, so person feels detached from their body or their thoughts or their emotions, and it's like they're watching themselves from the outside a little bit. So that can be really frightening, you know,
Mhm.
for somebody that is going through something like that. And, you know, there's also feeling disorganized or perhaps even a little bit dissociated from reality or disconnected from reality. So, being someone that is going through that experience, what's really important, I think, for listeners is it's not like they're dangerous. It's like they're a little bit more vulnerable, right?
I would say they're far more at risk.
Mm.
Absolutely, there's often been things, in the public domain about, news stories or celebrities that I think do portray this in a slightly different, but there will be far more people that experience or have these kinds of experiences that are more at risk to themselves than anything else. And I guess we should also point out that we're talking about this from a clinical perspective, from a mental health perspective. There would certainly be, contexts in which it's culturally meaningful to hear voices or see visions, but it's where it's understood by the community and often thought about that this is a real wisdom or have a spiritual connection. And I think one of the key differences is where it's culturally meaningful. These experiences are often not scary at all. So I guess what we're talking about in this episode is people that perhaps are coming into contact with mental health providers or therapists because the experiences that they're having are causing them problems or frightening them, or perhaps, people around them are worried for them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think we've all experienced maybe little moments of psychosis. Yeah. Why would I say that?
Well, I guess if we think about it on a continuum, and it's really hard, I think, to imagine what it's like to experience this if you haven't experienced it. But I wonder if an example that might be quite common would be if you were to have a fear of something that you think could be true or could be happening. So let's just say you're home alone and you maybe hear something and think there may be an intruder. That level of hypervigilance that kicks in, and that we're then listening out for every sound, but suddenly every sound we hear almost reinforces the fear that the thing we're really afraid of happening, there being an intruder there, is happening. So very rarely do those experiences be like, oh no, it's fine, and relax. So it's thinking about how where a fear or something that we're really worried about happening, suddenly then the information that we're taking in our environment is reinforcing, or we're attributing that in some way,
Yeah.
that fuels and maintains the fear of what we are worried may be happening. And that often, so that's certainly that sort of that attribution bias is not exclusive to psychosis. But I guess just thinking about perhaps having had an experience like that, and then the next day thinking, what was I thinking? And when it feels further away, we might question that, where did that come from? Because at the time it felt really real and I felt really afraid. But then after some time, it just, we can't get back in contact with that sense of why did I go to that place
Yeah.
of feeling so afraid. So we're not saying that that is psychosis, to be clear, but I guess just getting a sense of how
What it
our brain
feels
can
like.
work in ways
Yeah.
that can fuel and reinforce frightening experiences. And it may not be that they're always frightening experiences, but certainly for a lot of people who experience psychotic symptoms, it can be a very
Mm.
frightening experience.
Yeah. And then, I mean, what are some of the types of psychosis? And how might one start experiencing those kinds of symptoms of psychosis?
I mean, that is probably longer than we would possibly have for the conversation today.
Mm.
And it can show up in so many different ways. So the experience the person has individually, but also in different presentations. So thinking about how it can overlap with other experiences or with other types of difficulties. So and I know we've had an episode where we've thought a little bit about bipolar disorder. And a statistic I found was saying, almost 60%, 57% of people during a manic episode can experience symptoms that would be understood through a psychotic lens, and 13% during depressive episodes. It can be far more common than we'd imagine with presentations of emotionally unstable personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. So thinking about, especially there, it's the voice hearing and the paranoia. So that may be linked to, trauma-based experiences as well. It's also common in dementia and Alzheimer's. So depending
Mm.
on the type of dementia, but we're also thinking about delirium more
Mm.
generally. I think, most people may have heard of someone who perhaps with a really severe urinary tract infection maybe is seeing things that aren't there, or withdrawal from a drug, whether that's prescribed or non-prescribed drug taking. When the body withdraws, we can see things or have experiences that people around us aren't having. So
Yeah.
there are lots of times when we can have these experiences that would be understood primarily through a different lens. So they are certainly present in lots of different areas in drug taking. So it's not uncommon. Certainly, I think connected with cannabis use, and
Yeah.
that's not to say causal, but often those two things are paired together.
Yeah.
It's often more connected. I think we're more vulnerable. Sorry, you're going to say
Yeah.
something.
And also I think what can exacerbate it is severe sleep deprivation.
Hmm.
So if where I see it is there might be brief reactive psychosis where people are
Hmm.
following a grief or betrayal or childbirth or extreme moments of stress. There
Hmm.
might be a period of psychosis, and then you kind of like you did with the next day after you think there's an intruder, but it was a cat on the roof. You're
Hmm.
kind of like, well, what was that? Just a brief sort of
Hmm.
experience where it's a break of reality. But then there's also trauma-related psychosis where people might have had childhood trauma, abuse, neglect, bullying, social defeat, and that has led to years and years of what we call pathological accommodation. And then eventually it's all just too much. And when that
Hmm.
system can then collapse under the weight of that, sometimes there's experience of psychosis. So I think the thing is it's actually a little bit more common than we know, and it shouldn't be shamed either.
No.
When
No.
somebody has psychosis, we shouldn't see them as dangerous or scary. We should see them as like really vulnerable and at risk and treat them with like loving kindness. and
Mm.
almost like we want to put a big blanket around them and
Mhm.
provide reassurance and kind of like make them feel like it's going to be okay.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. And I was just circling back to thinking about your point about trauma and childhood trauma. There was a paper in 2022 looking at cumulative traumas and psychosis. So people who have, and it found that people who had five or more adverse childhood experiences, so that
Mm.
might be abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, divorce in the family, incarceration of a parent, domestic violence in the home, the whole range of ways, racism, your experiences growing up in communities where poverty is present, all of those different things, the different ways in which children can experience adversity. As adults, the likelihood of them having a psychotic-like experience increases by 193 times than people
And and
who
that
don't
would
have
make
those
total
childhood
sense
experiences.
because
Yeah.
we in our systems we have a capacity, like we have only
Mhm.
so much we can actually handle. If you think of an electricity system, there's a circuit breaker at some point when it's just too much to kind of handle. So sometimes that moment of the brain just going, we need to kind of just fragment and just kind of dissociate from this a little bit. It's too much, actually. You haven't had enough sleep, you haven't looked after yourself, and like thinking about all these things that have happened, it's just we can't handle it right now. So
Mhm.
there's this kind of kill switch that happens that then causes we just disconnect in a way. And from a kind of psychotherapy lens perspective, we look at it from the architecture of memory, where you have, if you have three systems of memory, you have your procedural memory, the routines, movement, bodily sensations. You
Mhm.
have semantic memory, which is facts, knowledge, words, the ability to kind of, you know, articulate things. And then you have episodic memory, which is, being able to kind of bring life before your eyes and scan and look at it. Now, what in traumatic psychosis, so if psychosis has been, you have that episode off the back of a lot of history of trauma, there's sometimes this loss of this episodic memory. Now, this is not for all types of psychosis, because I know you work in acute
Mhm.
settings where perhaps people can talk about everything that's happened, but for people that I've worked with, they struggle to talk about what's happened. They're kind of lost in a fog.
Mhm.
And in Mersey psychotherapy, we talk about flights and perchings, which is like a bird has flown off. And then there's moments where the bird lands and perches, and it's like, oh, there you are. Okay, now we can actually talk episodically about like where you went. But when they fly off like that, it's kind of it's part of that. It's all just been too much, and we just need to
Mhm.
kind of, you know, fly off for a while for safety. And then when it's kind of safe enough to return, then they can return. And the thing that
Mhm.
helps people kind of return to reality after those episodes is safety. And safety is the number one thing to establish in a therapeutic sense and even in the family. What can we
Yeah.
do to just kind of like stop querying the person and interrogating the person? Actually, just like have a cup of tea and everything's okay. And like reassurance, hugs, support is really what people need to feel safe again.
Or
It's
what,
going
yeah,
to,
whatever it is that helps the person feel safe.
yeah.
And I would say I very much have experienced, certainly on the, where a person's experience may have been quite traumatic in the past. There may be things that are just too hard to think about and they get pushed down so much, but at some point they need to come out. And sometimes how that can manifest is through a voice hearing experience or a delusional thought or delusional belief. And when I say delusional, delusional in the sense that that would not be shared by other people, but very
Mm,
strongly held by the individual. And it almost enabled the therapeutic work to begin, to start to name and talk about. But it was too painful for the
mm,
person to own it and say, this is my experience, this is what I think. But equally, it was too impactful to just keep pushed down. So it almost would have find its way out. So certainly therapeutically, we would be thinking first and foremost how to help build a sense of safeness. And I definitely have had experiences where what I might have been hearing, there would be a part of me of thinking, no, but that's not logical. That's not, I don't
Mm.
know. And almost could be a temptation to come back with logic or reality or facts or kind of trying to negotiate. And I think that what that misses is that this is often coming from a deep-seated need to explore a fear or own a fear or sit with something that is incredibly painful and difficult to sit with. So thinking about how we promote safeness in a space, whatever that looks like for a person, and then starting, so and I guess we may approach it a little bit differently, but certainly how I have approached it in the past has been, I guess, really trying to understand what the fears or the voice hearing or the thoughts are, so that we can start to integrate that into the formulation, to start to build that into our understanding of the full picture. And how you can do that might vary, I guess, but I've certainly had experiences where I would inquire for speaking to the person, but then I could kind of see them going offline, and the kind of, and I would actively ask, are you hearing the voice right now? And if the
Mm.
answer was yes, it was like, well, would it be okay to tell me what they're saying? And then you start to be able to open a dialogue and say, well, no, they say don't trust you. And so then it's, I guess, how you build trust to be able to acknowledge that this may be not them, a part of them, but what they may be bringing into the room is something meaningful for us to think about
Yeah.
and to integrate into our understanding of what's going on.
Like a part of them,
Mhm.
and I think if you think of internal family systems or parts therapy, it's like distinguishing, like that's a part of you. Part of you thinks that, and a part of you thinks that. Because I think one of the things that, if it was a traumatic type psychosis, is that dualism is sort of depleted. The ability to kind of see that there's one part that thinks this and another part that thinks that, and that it's okay for both parts to exist at the same time, or
Mm.
the ability to look at myself and say, well, I think this and this is separate. It's almost like everything just gets squished into one, like, ball of yarn. And then really what
Mm.
the work is to try and unravel all the yarn, and help the person kind of build their sense of self again.
Mm.
Because I think from a psychotherapy, we would say that it's a fracture of yourself. You actually have a kind of split with how you see yourself and experience yourself in the world. So in the actual work that we do, they're borrowing our prefrontal cortex in a way. We call
Mm.
it prosthetic prefrontal cortex. So we're helping them link with language their experience again. So when if they say, well, the voice is saying this, we're like, yeah. And, I'm wondering what that feels like. Can we name the feeling when the voice says that? So that they like, this is me and this is the voice. So there is
Mm.
that kind of separation. Or, yeah, when that happened, you felt sad. And we're trying to track it to feeling in the room here and now, so that they're
Mm.
here and this thing is completely separate over there. And
Mm.
I think in psychological work, it's kind of the same. It's just a different sort of modality. It's just that kind of, there's a part of you that thinks this and a part of you that thinks that. So,
And there are different approaches. There's CBT for psychosis. There are narrative approaches to psychosis. I guess the focus of my work at the acute phase of the journey is I guess things that have really become untenable to stay in the community for a person. So often a lot of barriers would come down, and
mm,
I guess it would be thinking about how we're able to make sense of what is important about this part of the experience.
yeah.
What is it that needs to be heard or named? And I mean, have you ever had that experience where you think something, and if someone would say, well, no, that's not right, it almost
Mm.
makes you want to go, well, yeah, it is. You almost makes you double down and kind of reinforce your position. So I think not hearing or trying to come back at someone with facts or come back at someone with your experience of reality can just reinforce the need for this part of the experience to be heard. And so that, I guess, is what we would be looking at therapeutically, is how to make a bit more space,
Yeah.
welcome it, try and make sense of it. And often that's the part that then helps it to release its hold on the
Yeah.
experience that the person is having.
I almost remember that movie, I think it was Sixth Sense, with the little boy who sees ghosts. And at the end there's that kind of moment where he basically begins to integrate, like, okay, I see ghosts and I can now talk to my mum about it.
Mhm,
And I think in the same way, in the work, and I'm not saying every psychosis is related to like the spiritual world, but it's about that integration of like there's really important meaning here. This thing is happening to you to give you a message in the same way that ghosts come in and they'll give us a message before they need to leave, or like it did in the movie. What is it that is important and meaningful about this experience? Like this wouldn't have happened. The fragmentation, the fracturing wouldn't have happened unless whatever that message was needed to be heard and needed to be
mhm,
integrated. So a lot of the work in the kind of post-psychosis phase, or in that phase of kind of like creating integration again, is the meaning, giving the
mhm.
person a sense of self again. And like now what this is like a T junction. My life got to here and no further, and now I need to actually go in a different direction.
I think it's that allowing us to understand what is meaningful about this part of the experience. Certainly in the work that I've done, in the people that I've spent time with, it's never been by chance that the person has thought what they've thought, or feared what they feared, or heard voices that told them to do what they told them to do. So it has always been contextually rich to really understand what that is. At the same time, I remember my very first experiences clinically in working with experiences that where someone may be hearing voices. And I remember feeling really thrown and really not knowing what to do. And I guess I'm looking back with some fondness at that younger version of myself, because now it feels so common sense to think about how we would embrace and hold a space safely to bring in and understand what is important about this experience for this
Yeah,
person, and how do we factor that into the therapeutic work. But I also remember very early on being really thrown and thinking, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to respond helpfully to this. So I think there's part of me that can still very much remember how coming across someone who's having these experiences can feel really outside the realm of what's comfortable, whether that's as a clinician or just as a general person. They can feel like really unusual experiences, and I guess knowing how to be helpful is something that's quite important. But I guess knowing, if you know the person, you might have a better sense of knowing what helps them feel safe, or
yeah,
safer. But I would say the one thing that I have seen as not helpful is trying to argue the
yeah.
argue the not
Or
arguing as an argument, but kind of trying to combat the
yeah, or
beliefs
tell
or
the
the thoughts.
person that they're crazy, or
Yeah,
because
no,
because
that's
it's
not your
not
reality.
that,
This is the
no,
reality.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're wrong, and like you shouldn't be
Mhm,
doing this. And yeah, I think it's that is so harmful. And I think that's where family and support people can
mhm,
just be a bit more supportive around, we're not like feeding the narrative, but we're just like curious about the narrative. Like I'm wondering what we think this means. And
mhm,
like this feels important. Let's look into this and examine it together. Because I think facing it alone is what is so frightening. When the
mhm,
person kind of feels, they're experiencing this experience and they're left alone with it. I mean,
mhm,
that's the very definition of trauma, is when you're left alone with something frightening. So I think that experience being held by somebody can just make it
mhm.
better. And I think the thing that's really important, it's very treatable and it's not
Yeah,
always permanent. I don't
no.
think I think people, I've seen many people completely recover, and it actually it made them better people in a way, integrated more. It was meaningful, the fracture that
Mm.
happened. And, I look back at that time of my life and I think, wow, I needed to make this change, or I needed to integrate this, or I needed to have this T junction where I went, no, from now onwards, I'm going to be like that. I think it can be really meaningful journey for the person.
I mean, it's absolutely a part of the journey. I think if the fracture, if it's too much to hold, we see this fracturing in different ways. And I think it's for how the mental health professionals, and I guess we're approaching it from a psychotherapy and a psychology perspective, but certainly in the unit I was in, there may have also been pharmacological interventions and other things that may help at the same time. And for family members, we're not advocating that people start becoming, pseudo therapists and
Mm,
start leaning in, but just thinking about, what do you need right now, or how do you knowing the person when things start to get difficult, what helps them? And there may
mm,
be periods where things are more settled for the person when they can actually tell you, when I start to feel this, this is what helps me, and this is what doesn't. And I
mm,
think the more sort of clarity we can have, rather than, it's often done with good intentions, but it may not actually be what the person needs in that moment or what they find helpful in that moment. And for some people, it may be a hug and a cup of tea. For another person, it may be some space or some peace and quiet, or,
a walk in
whatever it may
nature.
be, very unique to the person.
Yeah.
So getting a sense of what is helpful in those times takes away the guesswork for the loved ones, but it also is a way to give a language to the person, saying, you said perhaps when we see these things happening, that this is a helpful thing to ask or suggest. And so that's what I'm doing now. Just I can help cue someone in to the fact that that might be what they're experiencing right now. I mean, there are times, so, we're thinking of this as a continuum. Sometimes these things, there may be a risk that a person is posing to themselves or others. Certainly, psychosis can show up in the postpartum period, and that would be something that would
Mm,
want to be, responded to very quickly. So I think if in doubt, it's contacting through mental health services or whatever that looks like in the country that you're in. But I think that approaching with compassion and often to get some support for yourself. So if you have a loved one that's been struggling with something like this for a long time, that it can be really hard going on the loved ones to often feel quite helpless or to not know what to do to be supportive or useful. And then actually, I guess, getting some carers support to get some, fill up your own tank a little bit, to
yeah.
help yourself, but also it helps you be more present for your loved one.
Yeah. And I think there's lots of studies about different types of treatments that are out there. I mean, there's like you've said, there's psychological treatments, there are psychotherapy treatments, there's psychiatric interventions which offer
Mhm.
a lot of those medications are a really good scaffold for the person to just feel
Mhm.
more stable, to be able to articulate or tolerate, some of the intervention work that is being done. But there was another study that I read called Open Dialogue,
Mm.
developed in Finland, where people sort of sit rather than the person being in isolation, they actually bring together the person, their family, everybody all together. Let's all just talk about what's happened here and how do we
Mhm.
kind of support this person. And it was the results of the study were talking about how educational it was for the whole system, and that the
Mhm.
whole system could see how they were involved in causing, in some way, shape, or form, the psychosis of the person, or
Mm.
they had some involvement, or that perhaps when they do X, it actually really helps, or this part it doesn't help, So everybody actually being part of the solution can be, yeah. It seems that study seems to have some good results there. So there's many different treatments and it's very treatable. And I think
Mhm.
if somebody, if you're listening to this and sort of experiencing moments of psychosis or worried about yourself with psychosis, just because the label doesn't sound good, like, oh, psychosis, that doesn't sound good, or it sounds very shamey and negative, it's often a very important turning point in that person's life. And like a electricity system that has just had too much load and we need like a kill switch to now rewire differently for the future. Perhaps it isn't this, oh my gosh, this is now a permanent situation and I'm crazy. It's very treatable.
And often marks a really important opportunity to express something that hasn't yet found expression or hasn't yet been heard. And I guess, yeah, we've said it several times that might look really different for different
Yeah,
people. And for some people, it is a longer term part of their experience. And for other people, it's something that with processing can go and not return. But
yeah,
certainly, I would say that the narratives that might be available in the public in through movies, through
mhm.
TV, and the news, I think doesn't do justice to what
No,
this is like on the sort of the bigger picture. It's quite a skewed view, I think.
yeah. So on that note, we will end there. So thank you for joining me, Lindsay, and till next time when we continue to talk about all things health, trauma, and relationships. Take care. The information shared on the Naked Insights podcast is for educational and information purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. While we aim to provide helpful and accurate insights, individual experiences may vary. If you're experiencing trauma, mental health issues, or distress, please seek guidance from a qualified professional. The views expressed by us as the hosts are our own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any affiliated organizations.